When you try to understand the Inca Empire, you immediately hit this wall. A fascinating but really frustrating wall. See, almost everything we think we know about them, their history, their gods, their daily lives, it was all written down after they were conquered. So the real question is, how do you even begin to tell the story of a people when that story was written by their enemies? Well, let's dive in and try to piece this puzzle together.
And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. Imagine trying to appreciate a masterpiece painting, but the only way you can look at it is through its reflection in a warped, cracked mirror. I mean, that's pretty much what studying the Inca is like. Every single story, every little detail is filtered through the Spanish lens, which makes finding the real, unbiased truth an enormous challenge.
Okay, so what are our sources? What are we actually working with here? Well, essentially you have two very different and equally problematic kinds of storytellers. In one corner, you've got the Spanish chroniclers. These are the priests and the soldiers. Their accounts are almost always biased, written to paint the Inca as savages to justify the whole conquest. And then in the other corner, you have authors of mixed heritage, writing decades later, often looking back and romanticizing the past, turning it into a kind of lost utopia. The big takeaway? Neither of these sources is giving us the straight, unvarnished truth. Not even close.
But here's the thing. Even with all these biased accounts, one thing just shines through with blinding clarity. The Inca built one of the most incredible empires the world has ever seen. And they did it with this unbelievable speed, almost like a force of nature just reshaping an entire continent.
So get this, at its absolute peak, the Inca Empire was ruling over something like 12 million people. Just to put that into perspective, that's more people than live in London or New York City today. And they managed all of this without any of our modern tech, across some of the most brutal terrain on the planet.
And speaking of that terrain, this empire stretched for a staggering 2,500 miles along the spine of the Andes Mountains, all the way from modern-day Colombia down to Chile. Think about it. You're trying to connect people living on freezing mountaintops, down in the thick Amazon jungle, and out in the driest deserts on Earth. That wasn't some hypothetical challenge. That was the daily reality of running the Inca Empire.
Okay, but here's where it gets truly mind-blowing. It's not about what they had, it's about what they didn't have. They built this massive, sophisticated empire without the wheel. No iron tools, no written language, at least not in a way we'd recognize. And get this, no money, no markets. The whole economy was based on a labor tax, and they kept track of it all with this incredibly complex system of knotted cords called the quipu.
So who was the architect of all this? Well, his name was Pachakuti. And his name is just epic. It doesn't just mean earthshaker. We're talking about a cataclysmic event that literally overturned space and time to remake the world. And honestly, that's pretty much exactly what he did.
And how did he expand so fast? Well, his method of conquest was just brutally efficient. First, they'd show up and offer you gifts, propose an alliance. But if you said no, Step 2 was to gather a massive army. We're talking over 100,000 warriors, right on your doorstep, banging drums made from the skin of enemies they'd already defeated. Yeah, so as you can imagine, most groups just gave in. Actual war was always the last resort. But brute force was just one part of the equation. To really get the Inca, we have to look at something much weirder, something that shaped their entire world, their relationship with the dead.
I know this is going to sound completely wild, but in the Inca Empire, the dead had a very busy social life. For the elite, anyway. See, for them, death wasn't the end. It was just a new phase of your career, I guess.
Okay, so when an emperor died, his body was mummified, and he kept everything. We're talking all his land, all his palaces, all his wealth. And the mummy was still a part of society. He'd be brought out for feasts, consulted on big political decisions, and even taken on visits to go hang out with other dead emperors. His living family would manage his estate, sure, but they didn't own any of it. The mummy did.
So you can probably see the giant fundamental problem this system creates, right? If every dead emperor keeps all his stuff, what's left for the new guy who just got crowned? Nothing. This system basically created a built-in engine for conquest. To get his own wealth and power, every single new Sapa Inca had to go out and conquer brand new lands.
But this relentless engine of expansion was about to drive the empire straight into a perfect storm, a series of absolute disasters that would bring the whole thing crashing down.
First up, plague. Smallpox, maybe measles, it probably swept down from Mexico long before any Spaniards set foot in the empire. It tore through the population and, crucially, it killed the reigning emperor Huayna Capac and his chosen heir.
And what happens when an emperor and his heir die suddenly? Civil war. You get an instant power vacuum. Two of his remaining sons, who were half-brothers, immediately started a bloody, brutal civil war for the throne, and it basically ripped the empire in half.
And it was into this absolute chaos, this plague-ridden, war-torn, divided empire, that the third and final disaster showed up: Francisco Pizarro and his tiny band of conquistadors.
So the civil war pitted brother against brother. You had Huáscar, who was backed by the nobility in the capital Cusco, and then you had his brother Atahualpa, who commanded their father's veteran, battle-hardened army up in the north. In the end, Atahualpa won, but the victory came at a massive, massive cost to the empire.
Right as the new emperor, Atahualpa, is finally consolidating his power, he starts getting these weird reports. Strange, pale-skinned men arriving on the coast. And their numbers, it was almost laughable. Pizarro's entire force was just 168 men.
Atahualpa, on the other hand, had something like 80,000 soldiers in that region alone. The mismatch was astronomical. He wasn't scared. He was curious. So he agrees to meet these weird foreigners in a town called Cajamarca.
So, how in the world did 168 guys topple an empire of millions? The answer is just a brutal, perfectly executed ambush. Atahualpa shows up to the meeting in the main square of Cajamarca with a mostly unarmed ceremonial crew. Pizarro's men, they were hidden everywhere. On a signal, they just unleash hell. Cannons, muskets, cavalry, and steel armor. All of it was military tech the Inca had never even seen before. The chaos was absolute. They killed thousands, and in all that confusion, they grabbed the emperor himself.
With the Sapa Inca, their living god, held hostage, the entire empire's command structure was just paralyzed. And what came next was the systematic dismantling of a civilization. It's a story that left behind a legacy of both tragedy and just incredible resilience. The Spanish basically went on a campaign to erase Inca culture. Those sacred royal mummies, they were confiscated and buried. The great temples, like the one in Cusco, were torn down, and they built churches right on top of their foundations. And all those priceless gold artifacts, most were just melted down into bars and shipped off to Spain.
And what about the conquerors? They didn't exactly get a happy ending. All that gold and wealth just fueled their own greed and backstabbing. And in a wild twist of fate, Francisco Pizarro himself was assassinated just 8 years later, and not by an Inca warrior, but by the son of one of his own Spanish rivals.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The Spanish destroyed so much, and yet the Inca legacy is still here. You can see it in the incredible textiles still woven today. You can hear it in modern political movements. You can literally touch it in the stone foundations of cities like Cusco. So it leaves us with this huge, lingering question. What is a civilization's true legacy when its entire history is written by the very people who tried to wipe it out?